Mic check for Joe Grist.
Hey, Paul Rago, do you want to do a mic check?
Or how do I sound?
You sound good.
Okay, thanks.
We'll try this again. This is Joe Grist. Mic check.
You sound good.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Welcome back to the last day of the Mid-Atlantic Council meeting here in New York. We're going to be doing the business section or the session today. So let's start off with committee reports. We'll start off with the SSC report. Dr. Paul Rago, whenever you're ready, Paul.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologize, I do have a bit of a cold here, so I'm going to sound a little duller than normal, which if that's possible. We met September 12th and 13th in Baltimore, and all the materials behind tab 14. There's approximately 22 pages of material there. Next slide, please. Our agenda was fairly broad. We had 7 different topic areas there, ranging from offshore wind to the ecosystem group, and I'll get into each of those in a minute here. So next slide. Under offshore wind topics, there were 3 presentations. The first of which was presented by Garrett DePiper, and one of the interesting things for the council and its discussions is that he's doing some pretty innovative work related to evaluating recreational data from at-sea cell phone applications. And so where you have locations in which anglers check regulations. So it has some promise, and the companies that have been involved with this have in fact been very cooperative and look forward to working more with it. So it is a potential bridge to help inform some of the perplexing issues related to spatial distribution and so forth. This kind of set off a discussion within the group related to the whole issue of compliance in recreational fisheries. As we saw yesterday, there's not a lot of participation in the tilefish mandatory reporting. This whole, well, both philosophical and policy issues were some of the things that were brought up in this discussion, and certainly well beyond the remit of the SSC, but I think in general pretty interesting. Next slide, please. Of course, one of the big things is trying to estimate the effects of climate and how wind energy areas are going to affect fleets. And in this instance, there was a focus, a Rutgers project in conjunction with Andrew Sheld at VIMS, or William and Mary. But it was looking at the modeling of fleet behavior for clam vessels, and what are the potential effects on their behavior, their underlying economics, the bottom line, and ultimately stock assessments. So we anticipate displacement from a lot of traditional fishing areas, as well as ongoing increases in temperature. So you're getting kind of a double whammy with surf clams and ocean quahogs. So they'll be changing their distribution, as well as the fleet will have to modify or adjust in response to the changes in the wind area opportunities for fishing. And one of the things that we noted that these analyses could be useful for is historical patterns of landings per unit effort in both surf clams and quahogs have always been difficult to interpret, mostly because of the differences that occur between areas. So there was some thought that this simulation model could have some ancillary benefits for the stock assessments in general. Next slide, please. Okay, the Dave Secor is leading a study on focusing on black sea bass fisheries, and this is an integrated survey to understand how both recreational and trap fisheries for sea bass are going to be impacted. They're doing fairly intensive monthly surveys. They have continuous real-time acoustics to sort of monitor not only the passage of finfish, but also other whales and marine mammals and so forth. They're using some of the more powerful statistical techniques for the before and after comparisons, as well as so-called gradient methods that sort of look at the effect of the wind energy areas on a spatial basis there. So, and there's anticipated that there will be some, excuse me, some attraction to the sites and variations in rates of removals, particularly when, if these areas become prime fishing for recreational fishermen. So next slide, please. Our recreational measures setting process is the rebranding of the Harvest Control Rules 2.0. And, Julia Beatty provided us with a very nice overview, not only of the existing program, but also with the changes that are likely to occur in response to the sunset provisions that were set up. So the SSC certainly appreciated the engagement by the council and on this process. We had endeared ourselves to the committee earlier with our critique of some of the earlier measures. So I think this is the appropriate and necessary step in the right direction. So, we had a couple of general comments. One, these regulations will not necessarily create stability of population or ensure reduced volatility in future regulations. That is, so if you don't detect overfishing, you can require substantial changes. So you may have a period of stability when you set them up, but if you don't update them or you fail to recognize a pattern, you're going to have a much more tectonic shift, if you will, when the regulations are updated in response to the undetected change. Next slide, please. We reiterated some of the concerns we had about the nature of the bins that are used and the magnitude of those percentage changes and so forth. And we think that some additional simulation analyses will be helpful in that. The new models that are currently being developed are also quite sophisticated, and I think many of them will address the concerns that the SSC had raised in the previous review, and going forward, I think there's a positive approach. The interactions with commercial fisheries, of course, are important, and we felt that whatever borrowing means, it really needs to have some scientific and management clarification so that we sort of are on the same page, so forth. So and then of course there's a natural linkage between the MSE work that's being done for summer flounder, and you received a nice summary from Brandon yesterday on those particular items. So that'll be another sort of strong scientific basis for these new regulations. Next slide, please. The commercial port sampling, Vic Vecchio and Brian Linton, Vic from the Garfo and Brian from the center, gave us some excellent presentations on recent trends. There's excuse me. There's been reductions in total budget, increasing cost, and low total numbers of samples, and these are alarming. There's no getting around it. The recent improvements were appreciated. They will help, but they're not going to be sufficient to offset the losses. So the SSC thought that if these problems are characteristic of in other areas of the country, it would be useful perhaps to have a review by the National Academy of Sciences. So that not only to look at the scope, but to highlight the centrality of these observations for managing fisheries. So next slide, please. The scup discard and gear restricted areas were done in a very nice analysis that was led by Hannah Hart and presented by Jason Didden. We were very much impressed with it, and also because it had some very convincing observations. One, the closure areas seemed to have kept the rate of discard mortality very low, only about 2% since their inception in 2000. However, it's not possible to establish these areas as the causal factor for scup recovery. But they have certainly contributed to overall management success. And as they say, victory has 1,000 fathers. But it does appear that they played a central role in it, but we don't know. We can't quantify that. We did think that at some point, as the program continues and is refined, that there should be some definition of what level of discard reduction is necessary. There have been some concerns expressed about total discards increasing in recent years, but based on the analysis of the assessment team there, these appear to be mostly due to increases in abundance rather than increases in the discard rate. So as the stock size increases, you will see an increase in total discards, even though the discard rate is not changing. And then finally, the SSC did not endorse a special study to relate scup discards to predictive environmental drivers at this time, despite the evidence presented about some other case studies where this had been done. It didn't seem like that was worth a major focus of effort at this point, and so we had a list of alternatives, and those are found in the report. This was not a formal review of the proposal, but it was just sort of a conceptual approach and so forth. But we noted that since the discard rates are in the order of currently 2%, there's not a whole lot of scope for going down much further in this assessment. So next slide, please. We did a quick overview of the stock projection alternatives for Atlantic mackerel. These have always been, I'm sure in recent years, very interactive and collaborative work with the center, and we appreciate that. But the review here was basically, are the options that are being evaluated logical? Do they hang together, and do they provide, depending on what they show, will they provide a basis for selecting timelines and measures that are consistent with the council risk policy? So next slide, please. So the OFL-CV working group provided an update, and of course, if you're following along in these various SSC reports, you'll notice that we have this very elaborate process for setting the CV, or the coefficient of variation, or in characterizing the uncertainty of the overfishing limit. And one of the reasons for that is that we want to make sure that everybody understands what is being considered, what is the basis for those determinations, and then how we integrate those values at the end of the day. So it's not a perfect process. It's not as quantitative as we would like, or as many might like, but we feel that the process is consistent with the information that is currently available. So, we're in the process of trying to determine whether or not it are all the factors necessary. Can we streamline it in any way? Are there interim data sources that, are these interim reports that we request from the center and the council, are they helpful? So, should we just wait a year and so forth? So another big issue looming on the horizon are the new state space models. These will have a different characterization of uncertainty, so we're going to need to adapt and make sure that the methodologies that we are using are carefully considered and appropriate. And then finally, there's a big issue for updating ABCs when an assessment is delayed. That is a difficult problem of basic logistics. So we will anticipate that problem is going to occur in the future as well. So despite everybody's good intentions, it's just simply huge demands. So between now and March of next year, we'll be looking at ways to improve this process. So and finally, we have a summary from the ecosystem working group. You had a lot of information on that yesterday. And this is the internal group that works on sort of developing the products that are used in the EAFM and so forth. But one of the things is to do there's some simulation work on how do environmentally driven changes in recruitment affect ABCs. So we're some studies by Mike Wilberg and John Wiedemann are underway to do that. There are alternative ways of sort of characterizing the overall productivity of the Northeast ecosystems. That will sort of ultimately give us a cap related to the not only the total amount of carbon that's fixed, but also how much of that or what's an appropriate total cap related to what can be harvested. So and then finally we had a presentation on some material about why do biological reference points change. We routinely update these, but and we note that they're due to changes in the biology of growth and weights at age, maturation, and natural mortality, or changes in the fishery, and in addition to recruitment over time. So we're looking at ways of sort of disentangling those competing effects and use that as sort of a better basis for identifying ecosystem effects. So that was kind of the gist of the material, and that's all I have. I appreciate any questions you might have and so forth. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Move on to our Monkfish Committee report. Peter Hughes.
Morning. I too, like Dr. Ray, allergies here. This is the Monkfish Committee report and some other reporting out in regards to the research set aside. The Monkfish Committee met on September 17th. RSA working group met on September 14th. Some of the outcomes of those meetings were to obviously finish the sturgeon framework, the joint dogfish, ordered an annual fish review, in the RSA improvement action after the IRSA report posted. Sent a letter to Garfo in regards to communications and other things that Garfo can just do. Consider streamlining the exempted fishing permit process, allocating PAMC, allowing vessels to flip to an RSA day at sea, while at sea, supporting other improvements that do not require council action to implement. We'd also discussed possibly joining Monkfish with skate for better management effectiveness. We considered merging Monkfish and skate, wanted to define and reduce permit latency in the fishery. So those are kind of all the high points that took place at these meetings. And like I said, the committee meeting met on the September 15th. The RSA working group was sent off to Garfo on the 2nd. All of these documents, supporting documents that I just spoke to are behind the Monkfish tab in our reports today. Happy to try and answer any questions. Jason might be on the line.
Any questions, comments for Peter? Jason, do you have anything to add?
Nope. Again, I think the main point is that New England is setting up for their 2024 priorities. So folks who are in that fishery or interested should just kind of plug into that process so they stay aware of upcoming monkfish management actions. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so no hands around the table. Peter, while you got the mic on, let's go to surf clam and ocean quahog report. Peter, take it away.
Great, thanks. The Surf Clam Ocean Quahog Committee jointly with the AP on September 15th discussed 3 topics: federal waters, FDA shellfish biotoxin protocols, ideas for the 2024 implementation plan items to recommend to the committee, update on the species separation requirements amendment. A series of 4 letters on the shellfish biotoxin protocols were received over the last week and under the executive report to be discussed when we get to Chris's report. For the species separation amendment, the staff sent a memo to the committee noting at this stage the FMAT has exhausted most options. Proposed solutions by industry, partial sorting board, final or all sorting at dealer, difficult to enforce, not provide adequate verifiable monitoring. Support agents, staff of GARFO, APSD, enforcement together. Solutions most likely to be enforceable and provide accurate monitoring, high cost on the industry. Advisors also indicated that they still support sorting and removal species in cage at the dealer. Some advisors support partial sorting on the vessels and then final sorting. We also discussed the issue not make any meeting. Agreed that the 2023 plan items for surf clam, quahogs, possible additions discussed should be carried forward in the. I will also note that we received a letter on October 4th, Monty Rome, expressing his interest for our support for continued support for EEs and research in Tucket area. My high points of the report. Surf Clam Ocean Quahog Committee. Questions, and try to address them. So then maybe Jessica.
Any questions or comments? Chris Moore?
Mr. Chair, just briefly, in terms of Peter's report, I think you heard him say that there's a letter behind the tab from Monty Rome issue. So take a look at it. This is basically a request that we support an EFP for harvesting surf clams in that particular area. See what that EFP looks like. And in fact, it's something we do. The other things are that the request by the advisors to continue to include some of those items that have been in our implementation plan in the past, 2024 implementation plan. In fact, if you get as well.
Michelle, do you have your hand up? Finally figured out a way to keep you quiet. Don't have your mic work. Thank you very much, Peter. Let's move on next to our Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel report. Hannah Hart, whenever you're ready, Hannah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So NTAP met late July. That was the last meeting we had in Baltimore. In the briefing materials, you have the agenda from that meeting as well as a summary of it. Had a lot of discussions. First, we started off the day with a update from the different surveys. Catherine Ford touched on the trawl update yesterday. We also got an update on the long line survey as well as the NEMAP survey. The bottom trawl survey had several issues this fall, a total loss of 43 sea days, and then some staffing issues because of OMAO, which is a branch of NOAA that is heavily involved in that survey. The bottom long line survey completed with no major issues, and then the NEMAP surveys were successful this year. All three, the Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and DIM survey all was successfully sampled their sites. Then from there, we dove into this Bigelow contingency plan discussion. I won't rehash that discussion. Catherine Ford touched on it yesterday, but the group ultimately decided to make a working group to further have those discussions and figure out what the best contingency plan forward is. That working group did meet last month, and I'll go over that in just a few moments. Then from there, that led us to lunch, and usually lunch isn't something to note, but we were actually able to go in an offshore wind simulator because of where we were meeting that meeting. Very interesting, very cool opportunity, at least from my perspective. Felt like it was in a universal ride. And then after lunch, we talked a little bit about offshore wind. That NEMAP definition came up again. Jim Gartland gave an update on that. There is an AFMC working group working on coming up with that definition. The main issue is, so offshore wind fishery monitoring surveys and survey mitigations are using this NEMAP definition. And NEMAP is really an umbrella of surveys. So it's not really appropriate to be used for these different monitoring surveys. So ASMFC is working on that, and Jim Gartland gave us an update, and you could see kind of their progress on that in this meeting summary. And then we got an update from Northeast Fisheries Science Center about the different fisheries resource monitorings at offshore wind farms and how those might be used for long-term assessment surveys. And there was a recent paper published that went into that, and there's a link provided in the summary if you want to take a deeper look. And that then led us to, we got an update on the restrictor rope research that the survey and BIMS have been working on, or sorry, the Science Center and BIMS has been working on. It really concentrated on the conclusions of that, and we talked about possibly publishing that research. And so the council will probably get an update on that research probably early next year. So you can see the conclusions and possible utility of it. That really kind of led us to the end of our meeting. We did have plans to brainstorm next research projects, but we ran out of time, so that'll be postponed for the next NTAP meeting. And as I mentioned, we created a working group to really concentrate on that Bigelow contingency plan. That group met September 5th, I believe it was. That was the first meeting of the working group. So we had, conversations about how we're going to share documents and things like that. And we talked about terms of reference, and Catherine touched on that yesterday. But we ultimately decided, because we are working on a rather strict timeline for this, so we're going to meet about every 2 months. Those meetings will be posted to our Mid-Atlantic website if you're interested. And we're planning to meet, I believe it's November 16th next. So if you're interested, feel free to tune in. And that concludes the update.
Do we have any questions or comments for Hannah? Jill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I mean, I assume obviously there's overlap between the motion that the council passed yesterday and the working group. So presumably one will inform the other, I hope.
Yeah, I actually asked Catherine this question after the New England Council passed that motion, and we're going to move forward with the working group, but working on things, and it's pretty much going to work simultaneously, is my understanding, and work together to develop maybe that white paper and help inform the Science Center on the best approaches to move forward with an industry-based survey. I don't know if Catherine's online and wants to add to that, or Wes, if you want to add anything.
No, I think you answered it perfectly. Any more questions, comments? Seeing none. Thank you, Hannah. Let's move on to the executive committee report. The executive committee met Tuesday in open session, and we were going over the actions and deliverables for 2024. We made a few, not really major changes, just minor changes, and we will be doing giving a report to the full council in December. Questions or comments on that? Seeing none, let's keep right on moving. Let's go on to the executive director's report. Chris Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a number of items behind the tab. Here's the list that we'll talk about this morning. I'll be relatively quick. A number of them have already been addressed in other parts of the meeting, so we won't go into those in detail. But the first document behind the tab is our typical document of basically detailing our planned meeting topics for 2023. After today, we have one meeting left. That meeting is going to occur in Philadelphia. It's a change. Typically, we don't meet in Philadelphia in December, but we are this year. So that's scheduled for the 11th through the 14th. I'm not sure that we'll need the full Tuesday. I'd certainly plan around lunchtime Tuesday, because this says 11th, and that's 11th is a month. So what I'm telling you right now is that based on what I can see in front of me, that we may not need that Monday. So plan on being there on Tuesday. I'm not sure what time on Tuesday yet, certainly. And Wednesday, obviously. Monday we'll hold in reserve. Typically we have more items in December, but we've taken care of a number of things that fallen off the list, but certainly staff day on Tuesday. Questions about the topics there, or anything that we need to talk about relative to that schedule? Remember, one thing that we did add as a result of the conversations we had this week is the review and approval of policy process guideline document. So we had that conversation, looking at a new draft of that document at that. Okay, that's our meeting in Philadelphia. Next item on the tab is a letter to Dr. Wendy Morrison, basically thanking NIMS for the opportunity to comments on the advance notice of public rulemaking for possible or potential future revisions to the guidelines of national standards 9. This is something we talked about at our last general. If you look at the overarching comments, bottom line is actually in that first paragraph. It says basically, general, although some clarity to the existing definitions or minor guidance adjustments to national standards 4, 8, and 9 could be helpful. Council believes the existing guidelines provide sufficient direction with enough flexibility to address current and future management challenges, including those associated with climate change. As such, should remain largely. Certainly, if you haven't seen this letter before, I can send it out, but if you haven't seen it, following pages. The next document behind the tab is another letter, comment letter. This is to Rick McCott. on National Standard 1 guidelines, specifically the draft technical guidance for estimating status determination reference points and their proxies in accordance with the National Standard 1 guidelines. And these comments in this particular letter represent largely the comments that the SSC expressed at their meeting in July. I'm not going to go into detail. Certainly, if you're interested, suggest if you haven't read the letter, and if there's a comment, certainly address those to me or to any questions or comments before I move on? Seeing none, there's a document behind the tab that's titled Overview of Inflation Reduction Act Funding for Councils. This is something that we talked about the other day. Plan. This has been revised based on additional conversations that we've had with NIMS. I indicated earlier this week, we will get, each council will get $375,000 to start. That represents $3 million, not to the 8 councils. So split up $3 million, it's $375,000. And we'll be applying for that amount of money sometime, assuming this year. So it's still uncertain as to exactly how it's going to play out. We will, just like our other grant, have to submit an application. How we're going to spend that $375,000. But the more important part of this is that, in fact, we have another chunk of money, $17 million, that then will be available to councils to utilize for climate-related research, have to basically compete. So, with the other councils for that money, it's not going to be divided like the other. And we'll be talking more about that, I'm sure, in December. Exactly how this council work with potentially the other East Coast councils, certainly work within our structure, within the research steering committee, to figure out exactly what we want to do. So trying to get some of that money. Any questions about that? Oh, Michelle.
Sorry, I'm the question queen.
Okay.
So, there's restrictions with respect to the types of actions that can be funding. It has to be fishery management measures necessary to include climate resiliency and response and advancement of climate-related planning, support of underserved communities. I'm just thinking about some of the presentations that we had yesterday from, John Hare and his staff with respect to some of the challenges that we're facing in data collection. And so there's no way to use any of this funding and I'm seeing heads shaking back and forth from both Mike and Chris to fill in any of those, what I would consider to be extremely necessary, data gaps like the port sampling and which is only getting more expensive and more challenging. So I assume that these are like the congressional strings that came with this money.
Yes, exactly. So if you look at the document behind the tab, you're looking at the section that's titled Priorities. Basically, those are the things that continues to emphasize that this money has to be spent on. Also emphasize the fact that the money turns staff, salaries can be used for things like data collection, like you just mentioned, Michelle. And they also emphasize the fact that there has to be something associated with the project that's likely to result. So if you think about some of the things that we may be thinking about from a council perspective, it might be, for example, research related to SCUP DRAs that could result, basically, argument that DRAs aren't working anymore. Climate change, oxygen, the odor makes sense. As such, therefore, we need to fund this research that model. So, expect as a result of that research that might be a change in how we deal with stuff like that. So those are the kinds of things that you all should be thinking. We'll have more detailed conversations in December our plan. Other questions or comments about that? The next item behind the tab, I thought I put this in here because I'm not sure that folks saw this. We had, I received an email from us done that I shared with everyone. And basically the email said that we now have an updated national saltwater recreation policy and associated implementation plans. Unless you clicked on it and actually looked within the document, you may not have noticed that in fact there's a Greater Atlantic Region saltwater recreation. And I put that in there because if you look at the topics and the list of things that are being proposed, several of them are in support of or in collaboration with them. I don't explicitly say that. So take a look at those. Certainly I'm not going to put those to you, but just scrolling through the document, you can see some of the things that we've actually talked about even this week. The next two items behind the tab are flyers associated with MREP. So I think most everyone around the table, some of you have been to these particular shops, some of you are on steering committees, Skip and Scott, to basically body to support this, what I believe is a very important activity, the Greater Atlantic. I've been a strong supporter of MREP. I got back to the council's executive director. Continues to be an excellent program. If you look at the flyer, it talks about, gives you, some of the highlights as to exactly what it's about. But most important, this is an advertisement for the 2024 workshop scheduled for February. If you're interested, haven't attended one of the workshops, I suggest that you do. Certainly, if you have any questions about what MREP is all about and how it works, you can ask all of us, me, Skip, and Scott about. Certainly, flyers for more specifics. Next week, we have the Council Coordination Committee meeting scheduled for Northern Virginia, October 11th through 13th. There's the agenda. Take a look at that agenda and note some of the things we're going to be talking about, including wind, national seafood strategy, about budgets. We're also going to be talking about something that we've talked about as council, and that is that NOAA fisheries policy regarding governance. So I think that's going to be an important conversation for us. Certainly look at that. There is, I'm going to reference a CCC letter in a minute, this list, and talk about that as well. Next thing behind the tab is the agenda for advisory panel meeting that happened in September. I can ask staff if you have any questions about that. Again, I'm not going to do that in detail. But we'd let you know that in fact this happened in some of the topics that were discussed. The last item behind the tab seems a little perspective of deal with, but we requested to put this letter in the briefing book from basically this is Peter Mullen requesting that his interest in having the New England Council to visit their area-based Atlantic herring quota measure included as informational correspondence for the midstream. So Peter asked that we do that. Some folks around the table do have some interest. It's not a species that we're doing. See Peter's letter. The other items, well, before these items, any questions or comments before I move? See you. Jason?
Thanks. I just wanted to kind of really encourage council members or public when MREP is starting its kind of campaign to get people to apply, and MREP really kind of counts on our management partners to try to figure out who would be good folks to reach out. So folks should see some outreach materials from the MREP folks soon. And the MREP program really appreciates when management partners kind of help identify folks who might like to attend that. Thanks.
Jason, and I think folks know this, Jason serves on the steering committee, he used to serve on the plan. Jason now does that for us, represent. I'm on a national steering committee. So a lot of interest and support for that. The next item that I want to talk about is this letter that I referenced earlier. This is the draft CCC letter on procedural. This is a letter that we staff and Atlanta Council staff are responsible for drafting. I think there's a number of the comments and a number of concerns that were expressed by us, the Atlanta Council. We are in the process of drafting another letter specifically from us. Some of the other councils are as well. This represents the collective thoughts of all the councils. It's not something I'm going to to you, but this is an important topic. It's certainly one that I personally have a lot of concern about, and has potential impact, large scale impact to what we do as a council. So something that we've been very involved with, we'll continue to be involved with. I'll make very specific comments at the CCC meeting next week. Councils will let you know how that goes. The next items that I want to talk to you about are regarding all these letters that Peter referenced regarding SP closed area. Remember, we as a council sent a letter to FDA basically asking that the area, expressing our concerns, basically at our recent June letter, said fishing industry members raised specific questions regarding what would be required to change the current PSP closed area on the bank to an open controlled status access area. This is the letter went in July. We got a response to the letter today. That letter is actually as well. I'm not going to you. Then got a letter from NIMS that Mike referenced earlier in the week. Take a look at that in terms of how NIMS is preparing to respond to these changes by. And finally, there's another letter in the briefing side foods to us. Dammer, basically some additional clarification regarding how that particular area. This is something that Marco actually addressed earlier in the week. I turn to Mike Petney, else that he'd like to say at this point. Not to put you on the spot or anything.
Thanks, Chris. No, I mean the letter kind of says where we are. We're putting together a proposed rule, and today, certainly seeking council review and input on that as we public comment. I'm sure the New England Council is going to have some thoughts that we'll hear loud and clear as well. So we'll have to carefully weigh that.
Any questions or comments about the letters? Anything else in the book behind the executive director's tab? I have two other issues. The next one I want to go to is ask Corey to put up this, what is this, a heat map? Is that describe it, Tori? I asked Tori to do this today because I thought it was pretty cool. And this represents some of the work that has been involved with. And also represents a response to a request that I have, which is basically to illustrate basically what we're talking about when we're talking about climate change. So we've talked about this many times, but we have very general comments where folks say, species are marching north and east. Well, not so much for some of these species, but this particular graph heat map as cool. It also is in response to something that Adam said the other day. It's basically, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that folks don't get to see. This is one example. So Tori, if you want to talk about this very quickly, briefly.
Sure. Yeah, so this is one of our latest products from the Northeast Regional Habitat Assessment. So this is coming from the joint species GAM models that Chris Haake has developed. And so that's based on NIMS bottom trawl survey data from 2000 to 2019, spring and fall. And then we're also using a stage-specific analysis, so splitting into juveniles and adults. And so what you're looking at is basically a 20-year trend. So the blues indicate increases and the reds indicate decreases. And so this is just summer flounder adults spring prediction, but we have this for 8 different species so far, spring and fall, and then juveniles and adults. And so something like this, we're going to work this into some of our EFH designations. So this could be a side product that we include with EFH designations. And then this also could get worked into state of ecosystem report, so an indicator of risk assessment for each species.
Thank you, Tori. So you'll see more of this stuff over time. Certainly, I thought it was something that aware of. Thank you. Questions about anything? So last but certainly not least, and probably more importantly, led with this, we had an individual in the room yesterday that tested positive for COVID this morning. So be aware of that. Cautions. Again, just to emphasize our protocol procedures for how we deal with COVID. Obviously, COVID is still around, something about actively supporting in-person meetings. But if you're not feeling well, don't come. We have the virtual option that works very well. Certainly you can stay at home and just use that. So that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Chris. Double check any more questions, comments for Chris? Seeing none, before we get into the organizational reports, let's take a little break so everybody can check out what needs to check out. All right, hang on. Before we do that, let's go ahead and we'll do Garfa report, Mike Pentney, because he's got another engagement. So go to break after that. Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I was expecting to go right away, so it's a quick call off at 10:50. All right, so I have a few items that I'll get through, and then if there's any questions, be happy to break. First item, Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument. On September 12th, NOAA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service published the draft of the management plan for the Canyons and Seamounts Monument, directed by the presidential proclamation. The plan is pretty brief. It defines agency management roles and responsibilities, without some goals and objectives for the next 15 years or so. The plan includes an environmental assessment to evaluate the potential impacts of implementing the proposed management actions. The alternatives really are how we permit activities. The preferred alternative is permitting structures that we already have in place that impose additional permitting restrictions or processes. The draft management plan and environmental assessment are available on the Wildlife Services Monument Management Plan webpage, and the public can comment through mail or on regs.gov through Thursday, October 26th. There's 3 virtual public meetings and 3 in-person meetings. Some of those have already occurred. Council staff have the full details of the meeting. Additional details about public input found on the Fish and Wildlife. September 18th, we published a proposed rule to permanently close an area known as the Massachusetts Restricted Area Wedge for right whales, and it's closed to persistent lines associated with spot trap gear. And the closures from February through here. This basically builds on an emergency action that we took in 2022 due to consistently high numbers of sightings of both right whales and pot trap gear in the area during the season, which obviously created a high risk of entanglement. Public comment period on the proposed rule is October 18th. We held some hearings last week on that up in We also talked about this the other day during the discussion around the sturgeon work and the framework adjustment for dogfish and monkfish, but on September 13th, we formally reinitiated biological opinion, and it covers a number of fisheries broader than just dogfish and monkfish, gillnet fisheries, and that's because we're being proactive and comprehensive to avoid having to do multiple biological opinions. Blue line tilefish. On August 29th, we filed a temporary rule to close the commercial blue line tilefish fishery effective September 5th, based on weekly landings from dealer reports, based on which we projected that 100% of the total allowable landings would have been harvested by September 5th. So as a result, the closure became effective and will remain in effect through the end of the calendar year. For some interest, on September 29th, we filed an interim final rule that implements mandatory harvester reporting in the lobster fishery, including electronic reporting, including also did maximum trap cap reductions and caps in the lobster. Based on the proposed rule comments, we're taking some additional comment on the maximum trap cap reductions and ownership caps. The Atlantic States Marine Fisheries for that opportunity to provide some additional thought and consideration given the time that had elapsed between when the Commission took action related to those published our rule. And so conditions have changed in the fishery, so the Commission looked at that and brought us input before those go back. Right now, the electronic reporting goes into effect 1st, 2024. We gave the industry 6 months, just like for our other electronic vessel trip report rule. And then the Area 2 and 3 ownership cap measures will be effective May 1st, 2025, with an extra year to provide that opportunity for the Moving on to cooperative research, a couple items of note. The 2024 Scallop Research Set-Aside Notice of Funding Opportunity published on August 23rd, and that closes October 23rd. So anyone who has a proposal for Scallop Research Set-Aside, please soon. And just to note, the accepting proposals for scallop surveys up to 4 years, and that was based on the request of the new. NOAA Fisheries has awarded approximately $2.5 million, 14 projects under the bycatch reduction engineering program. Five of the projects are in our and look to support research into on-demand fishing gear technologies, as well as cod and haddock bycatch reduction in the groundfish fishery, as well as to assess recreational discard mortality of striped bass. That's what I have today, Mr. Chairman. If there's any questions.
Peter Hughes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mike. Pardon my ignorance, but the requirement for lobster vessels to lobster current hold. You know, the technology, is it cellular based or is it BMS based? I mean, I can find that out outside of this if you don't know.
Two different things. There's this rule just was EVTRs, so it's the same ACCSP, it's Fish Online, it's the same EVTR that everybody else is using. You're thinking of the vessel tracking action that the Commission also passed a year or two ago that we're working on. We have not implemented that yet, but the intent for that, based on the Commission's program, is that be cellular based and a different system than the traditional VMS that we have on our federal fishery.
Great, thanks.
So kind of piggyback a little bit on that. We're not going to be required to have it by December like originally we thought, because we haven't seen anything put a tracking on the boat yet.
No, definitely not. We haven't gotten those.
All right, thank you.
But I can't speak, so that's on the federal side. This is being run through the Commission, so it's definitely being. Don't take my word as the final word, but work with your state and make sure you know what the state's.
Joe?
Thanks. I think it's going to end up being state specific. I think a few states are, have been a little more proactive and ready. They'll be quicker on this than others, but I think most of this will be early next year.
Yeah, I think Delaware, I think we're going to kind of piggyback onto Rhode Island, I think, because there's only one, maybe two of us. All right, any more questions for Mike? None? Thank you, Mike. With that, let's take a break till 10:15. John Hare, you're in the on deck circle. We'll see you at 10:15.
Thank you very much.
Welcome back, everyone. We'll go on now to the Northeast Fisheries Science Center report. Dr. Hare, are you ready?
I am, sir. Are you ready to hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Very good. Thank you. Just, run through our report. So as we all know, we're operating under a continuing resolution that ends on November 17th. And that is a very relevant date for us because our autumn bottom trawl survey ends on November 17th. So we don't expect the funding challenges to impact our bottom trawl survey. It is scheduled to sail on leg 2 today, and we will keep the council up to date on that survey. We also have our Gulf of Maine bottom longline survey, which will be starting a little bit later this month. And then Catherine Ford, Dr. Ford, and Mr. Chase presented on sort of an overview of our survey activities and what we're doing going forward earlier in this meeting. We also heard about the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel. And yes, we will work with that group on the white paper to look at a complementary survey and work with that group to help us develop and sort of evaluate the different options that we're creating for our surveys as we move forward and address the challenges presented by offshore wind energy development and maintenance and staffing and midlife repairs and all of the challenges which Dr. Ford brought up in her presentation. We also had the presentation from KB McCardle, our acting division chief of our fisheries monitoring and research division. As you got all the details from her about where the observer program is, and you also got all the details on where our cooperative research program is from Dr. Mercer in their presentation. I think it's useful to hear sort of some deep dives in terms of what's happening at the Science Center, and I'll just talk with Chris and we can continue to schedule those as we go forward and as it fits into your schedule. I did want to update a little bit on the assessments. Chris, I think Chris notified or alluded to that both the Black sea bass and state-spaced modeling research track working groups will be extended. They were really getting down to the wire in terms of needing to have materials ready for peer review. We felt it was best to give those working groups the time to get the materials together to a point where they were satisfied with them as opposed to forcing them to meet a deadline. So we've extended both of those research tracks. The Black sea bass peer review will happen in December, and the state-spaced peer review will happen in February. I recognize that this is frustrating. And as we've talked about at prior council meetings, I take full responsibility for some of the lapses that we've had in our stock assessments in the past years. That group has been understaffed and overworked, and we're still seeing evidence of that to this point. We have approved and are in the process of bringing on 5 new population dynamic scientists. The intent of those individuals is to add to our assessment capacity. And so I do see the Northeast Fisheries Science Center taking significant steps to ensure that these extensions and some of the other gaps in our assessments that have been identified previously are not occurring, and we're working to onboard those staff now. In terms of, we've got our NRCC meeting coming up in November, and we'll sort of talk about the assessment process there. The CAMS, the Catch Accounting and Monitoring System, that is complete, and version 1 is going live this week. We really appreciate the council's impetus to start that project and patience as the regional office and science center, completed version 1. We fully recognize that are likely improvements to be made. And so if the council or any users see things where they think improvements would be beneficial, please reach out to Mike Simpkins at the Science Center or Dave Gouveia at the regional office. In terms of just a little bit on protected species, the agency announced a significant investment into North Atlantic right whales, $82 million from the Inflation Reduction Act funding. Just real high level, a good portion of that will go to improve our monitoring, detection, and modeling approaches. A portion will go to address the vessel strike reduction and detection issue. A portion of that will support the development of on-demand fishing gear, and a portion of that will support Office of Law Enforcement enforcing regulations around North Atlantic right whales. And if the council is interested, I'd be happy to sort of give a more detailed presentation on what is in that $82 million and what our plans are to use those $82 million with other funds to protect and recover North Atlantic right whales. My last point that I want to make here is we did join a cooperative research and development agreement with Community Offshore Wind. This is our first sort of agreement to work with an offshore wind developer on developing monitoring protocols. And so I think it's a very exciting advancement for us. It really has an opportunity to help the Northeast Fisheries Science Center in terms of our survey mitigation strategy, help the community at large in terms of understanding the impacts of offshore wind development on the marine ecosystem, and then also help the developer, Community Offshore Wind, evaluate how they can develop sustainably in taking into account marine ecosystem structure, function, biodiversity, and ocean co-use. So we're looking forward to working with them on that cooperative research and development agreement. And with that, Mr. Chair, that's my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for John? Johnny Gwynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, John, nice presentation, a lot of information. On that $82 million, you mentioned something about for ship strikes, some of that money is going to be earmarked too. Could you kind of just touch base on that?
Yeah, so currently there are vessel speed rules in place with voluntary dynamic management areas, and the agency released a draft revision to that rule and is in the process of finalizing it. And that rule, works basically minimizes the risk of vessel strikes to North Atlantic right whales by reducing ship speed. And so with some of this $82 million, we will be working to evaluate and develop technologies that can reduce vessel strike via other mechanisms. So, vessel detection systems or vessel avoidance systems, very high resolution satellite imagery to provide much more complete information about where whales are and where whales aren't. Working, somewhat to evaluate the possibility of using satellite tags to provide information about the location of North Atlantic right whales. And the intent here really is to, see if we can be more dynamic in reducing vessel strike risk, focusing on areas where we know whales are. And again, I'd be happy to sort of provide more detail if you need it, Sonny, or provide more detail to the council if there's interest.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's just nice to know that the shipping industry stepping up to the plate and they're starting to help with this problem. Thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And there's going to be, one of the first steps is there's going to be a workshop, very early next year to bring together multiple parties to really talk about what technologies are available, are possible. And then within NOAA Fisheries, we're going to do some work with NASA to do, technology search to try to just understand what is out there, what's available, what's possible, and then, work with collaboratively to, evaluate what can we use to reduce vessel strike risk to North Atlantic right whales.
More questions around the table? On the webinar, James Fletcher.
Will you use or request any information at all, even a little bit from the Navy? Thank you.
From the Navy on North Atlantic right whales, we work with them regularly. They are in part fund our passive acoustics program, and we work quite a bit with the Navy on passive acoustics, and that's putting out recorders to listen for whales. Those recorders can both be archival, where they record and then you need to retrieve them to pull the data off of them, and they can be near real time, where they will report a detection of a North Atlantic right whale within hours of that detection being made. And there are other avenues with which we are planning to work with the Navy and that we are working with the Navy. So a short answer to your question, Mr. Fletcher, is yes.
You have a follow-up, Jim?
It is so frustrating to know that the Navy has the acoustic ability to affect the whales, and yet we still do not ask either somebody doesn't ask the right questions to get a way to stop slowing the container ships and stuff down and cost more money. There's a way to move the whales out of the path of the vessels, and we're not asking, somebody's not asking the right questions. I talk with people that work with the Navy that say, God's sakes, don't use my name. But they say that it's there, and then I come and listen to this, that we don't know how to do it, and it is just total frustration. But I am sorry. I guess I'm getting more frustrated. Thank you.
No worries. Again, if you are willing and able to share those names with me, I will certainly reach out and talk to the individuals that you mentioned, because we are serious about working on this issue and are interested in talking with anyone who can help us. So please pass the names on to me if you're able to.
Any more questions for John? Seeing none, thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Sir.
Go on to no Office of General Counsel, John Almeida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As John Hare just mentioned, we're currently operating under a continuing resolution. So in the case that we end up in lapse of appropriations, I just wanted to give you of what happens in terms of litigation. Typically, DOJ would file motions that would stay pending deadline, kind of put things on hold until appropriations are provided. And typically that's what happens in these cases in past shutdowns. So if we do find ourselves in a shutdown mode, that's one of the first things that DOJ will do with regards to these cases. Turning to the active litigation, we have a new case since our last meeting, New England Fishermen's Stewardship Association v. Raimondo, and this one was filed in the District of Maine, and it's a challenge to the New England Council's Groundfish Framework 65. This is another Appointments Clause challenge, a constitutional argument under the Appointments Clause, which you might remember several other cases that have been recently brought raising these same constitutional arguments. This is at its initial stages. It was only filed in early September. NIMS has until the middle of November to file an answer to that complaint. So, that case will unfold after that answer gets filed. The Natural Resource Defense Council v. Raimondo case, you may recall, this is the challenge to this council's recreational harvest control rule framework. At this point, NIMS has filed an answer and served the administrative record. And if there are disputes over the adequacy of the record, those will be addressed, potentially by motions. After that point, the case would move into merits briefing. And under the current schedule, if there are no disputes on the adequacy of the record, the merits briefing would happen this fall into February of 2024. Turning to right whale litigation, the Maine Lobstermen Association NIMS case, this was an ESA challenge to the 2021 Fisheries Biological Opinion with regards to lobster and right whale, and also a challenge to the 2021 MMPA rule. You may recall that NIMS won the district court before Judge Boasberg. DC Circuit reversed Judge Boasberg. The case has now been sent back to Judge Boasberg, and we're waiting for him to remand it to NIFS. And the plaintiffs in the CBD case, the companion case, have filed a motion seeking to delay the remand. Judge Boasberg hasn't ruled on that motion, but that's the posture of the case, of the Maine Lobstermen's Association case, right? And then the CBD case, the companion case in the district court, this was also a challenge to the 2021 Fisheries Biological Opinion and the 2021 rule, MMPA rule. You may recall that Judge Boasberg ruled against NIMS on the biological opinion and on the rule, and he set up a schedule for a new rulemaking to be completed by December of 2024. Subsequently, Congress passed the 2023 Consolidated Appropriations Act, which kind of changed the legal landscape and put things on hold in terms of rulemakings relating to the lobster, Jonah crab fisheries till the end of 2028. So it changed the schedule that Judge Boasberg had earlier provided in his remedy order. In terms of where this case is, NIMS has filed a motion to dismiss the case in light of the provisions of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and also in light of the DC Circuit's ruling, Maine Lobstermen's Association case. Briefing on this motion to dismiss is ongoing, and it should be completed by the end of November. So we'll see where things stand by the time we meet again in December. And then the New England Council, we have the challenges to the New England Council's industry-funded monitoring amendment, Loper Bright Fisheries case. This is the one that is currently in the Supreme Court. And at this point, it's fully briefed before the Supreme Court, and we are waiting to see if and when the court will schedule oral argument for that. And then there was another case challenging the same action that was filed in the District of Rhode Island. This is the Relentless Incorporated case. Those plaintiffs went through the District Court in Rhode Island and the First Circuit, both of which affirmed the industry-funded monitoring amendment. But now the plaintiffs in that case have petitioned the Supreme Court for review. Same, posture that the other folks did. Where the petition is fully briefed. We're waiting to hear what the Supreme Court will decide what to do in regards to this petition. In terms of other cases of interest, the council, the Lofstad case, this was challenge to this council's recreation commercial allocation amendment. Another appointments clause challenge, our appointments clause challenge. No movement on that case. It's fully briefed before the court in the District of New Jersey, waiting to hear from that court. Similarly, no movement on the appeal in the Second Circuit to this council's. This is a case brought by the state of New York challenging this council's commercial summer flounder commercial quota allocation amendment. Again, that case is fully briefed. There was oral argument in the Second Circuit, and we're just waiting. And that is my update. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Any questions? Comments to John? Seeing none, thank you very much. Let's move on to NOAA Office of Law Enforcement. Caleb Gilbert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you sound great.
All right. Good morning, council members. North Atlantic right whale conservation and observer program support continue to be our top two priorities for Office of Law Enforcement in the Northeast Division. I will update you all this morning related to those two priorities. We don't have a fourth quarter OLE written report to provide to the council for this meeting. And we plan to have that available to the council at the December meeting. Quick point before I move into North Atlantic right whale conservation, the use of VMS and enforcement actions has come up a number of times over the last couple of weeks, starting at the joint FMAT PDT Monkfish Dogfish Committee meeting held on September 20th. We want to provide some clarity on the matter related to conversations held at the New England Council last week, and I realized there was some VMS discussion this week during the Tuesday afternoon Monkfish Dogfish joint framework discussion. VMS is a foundational tool for enforcement. It allows OLE to monitor compliance, track violations, and provide substantial evidence for prosecution. VMS also, often serves as the backbone of a case triggering investigation, but each case is fact specific and each violation has specific elements that must be met by a preponderance of the evidence. As such, there may be some instances where VMS alone may not be sufficient to meet our evidentiary burden. In all cases, we seek to obtain the best evidence to support prosecution, and this includes VMS data, witness testimony, documentary evidence, and admissions, and among other things. So moving back onto right whale conservation, our efforts continue to be split between Atlantic large whale take reduction plan enforcement and speed rule enforcement. Similar to our next written report, we don't yet have Atlantic large whale take reduction plan compliance and patrol stats available from the fourth quarter FY23 as we've provided to the council for prior quarters in the past. We should be able to provide that to the council at the December meeting. I have one fourth quarter Atlantic large whale take reduction plan related activity I can share today that occurred since the August meeting. The second and last Lobster Management Area 3 ROV gear compliance patrol of the season concluded just in time before the advance of Hurricane Lee last month. Similar to the first op patrol, 2 officers inspected trawl gear in LMA 3 and officers inspected gear. Similarly on this patrol, 4 take reduction plan and Atlantic Coastal Fisheries Cooperative Management Act related violations, and related investigations are ongoing. Related to speed rule enforcement in the fourth quarter, we are preparing for the up and coming seasonal management area season that begins on November 1st, the start of the Mid-Atlantic SMA is designed to protect right whale migration route and calving grounds. Related to case processing, speed rule case processing, so far for the 22-23 SMA season, NOAA has assessed $180,000 across 8 cases. In total, between last year and this year so far, OLE and General Counsel Enforcement Section have combined to charge 55 speed rule cases at a total value of over $900,000. Also related to marine mammals in the fourth quarter fiscal year 23, 2 officers conducted a patrol in the first week of September within the Stellwagen Bank MAFMC sanctuary in response to reports of large concentrations of anglers fishing in the vicinity of feeding whales. We timed our patrol on a bluefin tuna commercial restricted fishing day to also be able to provide enforcement in that fishery. Officers contacted 2 charter party vessels during the patrol and boarded 4 HMS vessels. Both for-hire vessels were compliant with MMPA regulations. Moving on to our observer priority in the fourth quarter, since the August meeting, OLE and the Northeast Fisheries Observer Program collaborated on another webinar-based workshop for industry last month, focused on sexual assault, sexual harassment, and observers. The center advertised the event in a permit holder letter that went out in the center's annual SBRM mailing effort. However, no industry participated, and we'd welcome any thoughts folks have on how to improve attendance at these types of workshops in the future. Any Northeast Division agents participated in observer support panel discussions at 2 new observer training events, one held in August and another last month. And last, a special agent attended an observer roundtable meeting in Narragansett, Rhode Island last week. 3 observers attended, as well as the area coordinator who covers Rhode Island and adjacent ports, a contracted program manager, and fisheries monitoring operations branch staff attended as well. Together, the group discussed topics such as OLE case handling in general involving observers, negative observer experiences at sea, and specific case handling updates on previous incidents. We also continue to work on enforcement outside of our core priorities, such as HMS regulations I mentioned before. Related to commercial fluke violations, I'd like to mention the trial of U.S. versus Chris Winkler with the fishing vessel New Age. That began on September 11th in the Eastern District of New York and concluded yesterday. The government presented multiple witnesses to the jury, including 3 NOAA employees, 1 employee from New York Department of Environmental Conservation over the course of a 2 to 3 week long trial. There were a couple days off due to court scheduling, et cetera, I believe. Other witnesses included crew members from the fishing vessel New Age and seafood dealers. Mr. Winkler was unanimously convicted on 5 charges related to commercial fluke fishing in and around New York, and he now awaits sentencing. Agents from RD2 were deployed to assist with the logistics of trial and witness management during the trial. Reporters and journalists attended the trial. New York Times has provided coverage, and there is also now an official press release on the trial from the Department of Justice that was released yesterday. We've also given an update on blue line tilefish enforcement at the last couple of meetings. No new cases have closed that were based in the Mid-Atlantic that I can report on today, but there was 1 bag limit violation case that closed since the August meeting, but that occurred in the Florida Keys. We'll continue to update the council on any new blue line tilefish cases that close, if that's something the council would like us to continue to provide updates. And that's all I have to report today, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has them.
Thank you, Caleb. Any questions, comments? Seeing none. Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Move on to the U.S. Coast Guard, Lieutenant Commander Matt Cayley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. Yeah, going forward for our report over the past 2 months, we've conducted about 95 boardings, and mostly has been in HMS, summer flounder, black sea bass, snapper grouper, and a large portion of it on the rec sector, which is typically what we see this time of year with the weather being a little warmer and more recreation traffic out on the water. The boardings that we did do, we had 2 enforcement action reports that we issued. One was for a commercial vessel that was engaged in fishing without the required turtle mitigation gear. That was down south off of North Carolina. And then we had another one in that general area where a small boat station issued 2 enforcement action reports to a wreck vessel for exceeding the daily bag limit for grouper, and then for being in possession of an undersized fish. We didn't have any marine protected species support this time. Moving on to our commercial fishing vessel safety efforts, we've issued 74. We've conducted 74 dockside exams, issued about 60 decals, and we had 1 termination. The termination was for it happened in August, and it was for a vessel that was engaged in crabbing at the time in the Chest Bay, and they didn't have the required safety gear on board, so they terminated the voyage. And in our commercial fishing vessel safety examiners, they continue to do some outreach through dock walks, training, and educational efforts. And pretty short report this time, so that kind of concludes our report for this period. I also wanted to touch on a little bit of the AAS VMS discussion, kind of follow along with Caleb there. I understand there were some questions on the Monkfish Dogfish Joint Committee there on Tuesday. Fortunately, I wasn't able to attend, but I wanted to at least highlight some of our capabilities at sea. Our cutters, they have AIS capability. Some of our bigger cutters have connectivity and can look at VMS while they're underway. Our small boats a little more restricted. These are the ones at the stations, so they don't have they have good radar package, but don't have the AIS capability on there. But yeah, that's just wanted to touch on those. I'm happy to answer any questions related to that discussion or anything in our report. Over.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions? Comments for Matt? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let us move on to liaison reports. New England Council, your use.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is my liaison report from last week's council meeting. It was held in Plymouth, Massachusetts. It was a hybrid meeting also. First order of business with the election of officers. Both they agreed relevance for reappointment council, chair and vice chair. Council also welcomed their newest council member, Jackie Odell. The Scallop Committee report. The council received an overview of Scallop survey results. These surveys were conducted by the Coons Farm Foundation, Mass Dartmouth School for Marine Science and Technology, at the Institute of Marine Sciences, VIM. Surveys were carried out with industry partners under the Scallop RSA program due to mechanical problems, which you heard earlier, 2023 Federal Scallop Survey. Council added to their work priorities increasing VMS ping rates in Framework 38 to enforcement in the fishery. Council also moved to adopt Scallop Survey. In my report, there are a number of live links. People would dive into. New England Fishery Council Fishery Independent Surveys. We discussed that here with motion here. The habitat, the northern edge. Council tasked the PDT to analyze 4 areas in the development of access areas framework. Analysis should include estimates of biomass in each of the 4 areas, along with estimates of percentage of disturbance from fishing. Council also received a progress report following Atlantic Salmon Fish Management Plan, Salmon Aquaculture Framework, Council's Southern New England Habitat Area of Particular Concern, which currently is out for public comment through October 6th. Rule, the NOAA U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service draft for the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Monument, National Monument, and that is out for public comment through October. Received a Herring Committee report. The Herring Committee is revisiting the Amendment 8 inshore midwater trawl closure. Council voted to change the title from this action from Revisit Amendment 8 inshore midwater trawl closure to Action to minimize conflicts with herring fishery. I'll also task the Herring Committee and PDT to schedule 5 public scoping meetings to discuss user. Part of its work, the committee and PDT should file the record of conflicts. Also task to develop a scoping document by the Transboundary Management Guidance Committee report. Council approved the GC's recommendations for the United States Canada total allowable catches tax for 2024. Eastern Georgia's cod at a TAC of 520. TAC of 1,000 metric tons. Georgia's Bank TAC of 168. Under the Groundfish Committee report for framework 66, specification of the management measure, council added a yellowtail alternative change for catch in 2024 only. Scallop accountability measure implementation policy such that the scallop fishery Georges Bank yellowtail would only be scallop fishery exceeds its sub ACL for the stock and overall ACL for the stock is also exceeded. Council moved to modify or replace the existing groundfish ABC control rules to better address the goals and objectives of the North species fishery management. They also moved to develop a tiered groundfish ABC control rule, which considers potential categories but is not limited to stock status, including unknown and remote, stock assessment, model type, sources or level of uncertainty, and productivity. Last one is monkfish dogfish to reduce sturgeon bycatch in the Monkfish Committee report. We discussed that on Tuesday earlier today. Have a question on herring, Chris. So that concludes my report. Sorry, I get the first question, Mr. Chair. So I advocated for 2 public hearings in the Mid-Atlantic. We'd held public hearings up in the New England region for Atlantic mackerel were very beneficial. I don't know that the 2 that I in the Mid-Atlantic heard from a couple of people who said kind of, no, I don't think that would be necessary up above and a webinar version. Let the council know that also. Still have it listed as 5 meetings. So I don't know if they're going to be down here or not. I'm hearing correct advice, but they still have.
Yeah, that's fine. So you basically told them that they should have some down here. Having a webinar?
It hasn't been we're going to know more in January, but yes, there is a recommended webinar one that I think would capture the Mid-Atlantic interests. So I don't necessarily know the expense of hosting a meeting. That's not up to me. That's I suggested it because we'd held the macro meetings up. We don't need it. I don't see why we should.
Yeah, I agree. I'll have a conversation with Kate. Talk to staff. All right.
Any questions for Peter? None. Thank you, Peter. Let's move on to the South Atlantic Council that Carrie has graciously volunteered to give. Whenever you're ready, Carrie.
Thank you. And I know I'm standing here. So my report is in your briefing book. I will just hit on a couple items that I think you interested in. We met in September a couple weeks ago. Your chairman was the liaison, having him there. So the first thing I just was going to tell you about is our commercial electronic logbook amendment. We have been on paper for a long time, and I think this will be welcome news to any of your people, GARFO and CRO permits. Ourselves and the Gulf have approved the commercial e-logbook amendment for final submission. So hopefully in whatever century we're in now, lost track. But as someone who does the reporting on paper, I can say I'm very happy that we're finally going to be doing electronic logbook reporting, and that counts. That's our snapper grouper, dolphin, wahoo, and coastal migratory pelagics, so mackerel and wahoo permits that we'll be using that. And the other thing I thought might interest you is we're working on some black sea bass management. We did get an assessment recently that showed that our black sea bass are undergoing fishing and are overfish. So we do have that to deal with, but the I think more interesting thing, we have a closed area, primarily off of North Carolina and South Carolina. It's closed in the winter due to right whale migration. Our fishermen have been working on cooperative research, FP, ropeless gear, to have that area possibly open back up. It's a very, very small group of fishermen. We only have like 30 people permitted to even use traps. I think only like 7 people are actually trap fishing sea bass in our area anymore. So they have been working on this EFP. It's been really successful. It works well for this small group of people for this fishery. And so we will be moving forward with making ropeless gear allowable gear, but sea bass fishery, and then eventually it'll be on a little bit of a slower time frame. But I think the intent is to look into opening that closed area ropeless gear. And then I think the only other last thing I was going to mention to y'all is that we will be doing port meetings on Atlantic Spanish mackerel and king mackerel. Our staff is working closely with commission staff to look at having meetings all the way up the East Coast. So if you know any fishermen who may be that, either they can reach out to me and I can make sure that they're in touch with our staff, or if anyone has any idea of where they should be held or anything like that. Again, it's the commission and Christina Wiegand at our staff who will. So I thought that might be of interest to you all, and I think that's kind of it. Like I said, everything else is.
Thank you, Carrie. I enjoyed my time down there. Thank you. Any questions? John Almeida.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the electronic logbook amendment, would that cover all fisheries in that region? I know there's like some loose ends. Would that cover everything?
Yeah, so like I said, it covers our snapper grouper, so coastal migratory pelagic, dolphin, wahoo, yes, all our commercial fish, that is covered. And I know there has been an issue with some of the folks that already have GARFO permits who are already electronically reporting. I know that they were allowed to beta test, if you will, the new system. And there has been a little glitch every now and then with no fishing reports and permit renewals in the Southeast. Like there's some stuff that's happening between the two. But my understanding is that is it.
Sonny Quinn.
Thank you. And would that include smoothhound too?
We don't manage that, so.
I didn't know if, I thought the smoothhound was on the Southeast permit. No. Okay, I'm sorry.
Michelle Duval.
Learn something new every day. Hey, Carrie, I was just curious. I know y'all have been working on the private recreational permitting amendment 46, and so I was curious to know kind of where that stands, especially I think with the action with respect to revising the red snapper ABCs and sort of the recent study that came out from MREP with respect to the fishing upward survey. So curious what impact that's had on that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I wasn't sure how much detail y'all were interested in this, but I thought about mentioning that we started our last meeting with a presentation from Richard Cody about the FES pilot study there. As I'm sure you all know, we have a large recreational component, all of our fisheries, so big deal to us. It was a big deal. We had a motion at the beginning of the past that as we went through the entire September meeting, that meeting a couple weeks ago, every amendment that we were discussing stopped before we discussed it. We had to assess what we thought the impact of sort of this potential FES situation was. That's why there was a statutory timeline that maybe preceded our concerns about that. And then we decided that we needed a timeline for every single amendment we at the moment, which has included our very favorite species, red snapper. And if climate change happens and they all start moving up here, I would be very, very happy.
I think all of us would be happy to send them your way. And so ultimately with Red Snapper had been formally approved by the council and, but had not been submitted to the agency. So our council at the last meeting, large concern over FES, voted to hold actually sending it to the agency, going to discuss it again at our December meeting, where we get with that. So obviously we have a lot of concern about FES and recreational reporting, which leads me into the first part of your question, which was our Amendment 46, which is recreational reporting. We are still in the phase we went to scoping. We have a really great technical AP with all the state people that are really, we're getting down to the nuance of, is it vessel versus, and it's not even reporting at this point. I'm sorry, I misspoke. Right now, we're just talking about permitting. We've decided to sort of remove the reporting part out of it. I learned a lot this week. We often talk about your tilefish recreational permit, and we hold it up very high, and I think it's a program, but I certainly learned a lot about possibly fishing things. So anyway, we have a technical AP right now where we're narrowing down, do we do vessel, do we do per person, sort of all the nitty gritty of the requirements. And at this point, we are moving forward with that amendment. At the same time, there's lots of talk amongst the states about possibly own thing, because I think that's more palatable to the fishermen. And I think we will ultimately sort of come up with what we want to happen, then have the provision there was for saltwater stamps, where it's like area they can implement.
Any more questions for Carrie? Seeing none, thank you very much. Move on to our last agenda item, other business. Do we have any other business bring before the council? Peter Hughes?
Just real quick, I had this conversation with Chris a few minutes ago, but I had mentioned the VMS requirement and put something on the this year. Discussed it. I bring that up. My fault, that I'm but other considerations and email outlining what basically their motion is just better understand how it applies to important station both councils. So
Anyone else around the table? Bobby Rule?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take a minute to thank the council and council staff, as well as everyone else, that for the outpouring of their condolences and sympathies and support over the last week. On behalf of myself and my family, it's genuinely appreciated, and a stark reminder of how far-reaching my father's presence was. I apologize for not being able to attend in person. It's definitely not how I wanted to start my term, but I can guarantee that from this point on, I'll make myself available for every possible meeting from here on out. But no, I may never be the powerhouse that my father was, but I'll do everything that I can with the skills that he taught me to continue his legacy. Thank you.
Yeah, Bobby, we all loved your dad, that is for sure. Seeing nothing else before the council, I'm going to call the meeting to adjourn, and I will see everyone in Philadelphia in December.